My name is Veronica Dickerson, and I would like to thank you for coming and joining me for our talk on a journey back in time. What I hope to leave you with today is a better understanding of the early history of the Ohio Erie Canal and how it connected the frontier to the nation. Picture the time. It's the early 1800s, and most of the United States is a frontier, sparsely settled by independent Indian nations and wandering explorers. Many European settlers came to the west to places like the Cuyahoga Valley, seeking rich land that they could farm. Once here, however, most settlers struggled just to make it. Even if they could raise a crop, getting any of the surplus to a market required a journey that could take more than a month. So what do you think would happen? All of that surplus would be spoiled. The United States was still very young and very new, founded on democracy with a vast underdevelopment of resources. In the East, the economy depended on imports from Europe, but sadly the West had no efficient way to export its goods over the Appalachian Mountains. So this idea was born. A way to unite the divided geography, which would begin with the construction of the Ohio Erie Canal. By connecting the Ohio frontier to places like New York and New Orleans, the Ohio Erie Canal would help people flow across America, fueling westward expansion, a national market economy, and regional industrial might. Construction of this canal began in 1825, and within 6 months, the area welcomed German and Irish immigrants who had come to Ohio after completing New York's Erie Canal. They joined local farmers and laborers who were already working on the canal just to supplement their income, and initially the wages were a mere 30 cents a day. By September 1825, more than 2,000 men were working on building what had become known as the Big Ditch. Take a moment now and close your eyes and imagine that you can hear the men groaning and grunting and the sounds of their shovels hitting the earth. It was once said that the Ohio wilderness was so thick that a squirrel could cross from one side of the state to the other side of the state without ever touching his foot on solid ground. To construct the canal, the men first had to chop a path through the forest using picks, shovels, and wheelbarrows. Here's a picture so that you can get a better idea of how the tools looked and what the items looked like that the men were using. These laborers would work from sunup until sundown, clearing the path and then digging the canal with just these tools. The main channel of the canal was to be 26 feet wide at the base and 40 feet wide at the waterline. This was in order to accommodate boats that would be 78 feet long and 14 feet wide. Take a moment and think. What kind of holes have you dug at home? What kind of earth did you come in contact with, and how hard were they for just a simple hole? Now consider what I just mentioned. These areas that were being dug were going to be 26 feet wide and 40 feet wide. The water depth that would end up being in these canals would be roughly at 4 feet. Once dug, the canal ditch was then lined with clay to make it watertight. Construction of the sandstone locks was also very difficult. Each stone weighed between 2 and 4 tons. and had to be placed by using a system of ropes and pulleys. To give you a better idea of the magnitude, here is a picture of one of the locks, and you can kind of see the size of the stones and get a better understanding because of the size and how high they needed to be stacked. Beyond the dangers of the work itself was the possibility of catching malaria, or canal fever as it was called by the workers. Many of these workers lost their lives to this disease. It had been said that an Irishman was buried for every mile of canal constructed. Now remember that number when I tell you a little detail later in our talk. So for every mile, one Irishman died. So what then? How do you think these large canal boats would move through this newly created system? Well, they used horses and mules to provide the power. What they would do is they would connect the boat to the horses or the mules by what were called tow lines. And the animals would pull the boats along the canal by walking what was called a tow path. Now this tow path was made the same time that the canal was dug. And there would be a mule driver walking alongside the horses or the mules. So what you'll see in this picture is a representation of the mules. There's 3 mules here with the tow lines attached, with the walker, and then here in the background is the canal boat. Now these canal boats could weigh up to 4 tons. So it's just a little thought, to keep in mind that you have these 3 little mules pulling along this 4-ton boat. So when it was all said and done, the Ohio-Erie Canal was 309 miles, and it linked Lake Erie with the Ohio River. Now remember that little detail I told you just a little bit ago about one Irishman dying for every mile of canalway? And this canal ended up being 309 miles. So at the minimum, 309 individuals lost their lives building this canalway. I have a map here. So in this picture, you can get a better understanding of the complexity and the linkage that was created by this canal. So all of the green lines that you see here are canal. And these areas that you see helped to connect the area. The canal was pivotal to the economic growth of this region. It incorporated the nature of human action shaping and renewing land for economic expansion, including agriculture, commerce, industry, and capitalism. Now, the boats that were used in the canal were not just used to move surplus goods in and out of the area, but livestock and people as well. So here you have a picture of a canal boat, and this is one of the passenger boats. This is quite a big thing in the time. A lot of people would choose this form of transportation to move around. The canal was a large contributor to the rapid growth of the corridor, and it facilitated the transition from being a leader in commercial trade and exporter of natural resources to being a leader in industrial development and innovation. Much of what exists today exists because of the canal. So if you kind of think a little bit about what if the canal hadn't been built, what may this area have been like had it not been for the canal? Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed our talk.